I was 32, utterly broke, and staring at a final eviction notice when I inherited a flooded nightmare in Oregon. I thought draining that basement would just fix the plumbing. I was wrong. The rusted chest buried under the concrete didn't hold salvation. It held a deeply buried murder. The cardboard box was surprisingly light. That's the first thing I remember about the day my life fell apart. After 5 years of working 80-hour weeks as a logistics coordinator for Zenith Freight in Seattle, all my worldly professional possessions fit into a single flimsy banker's box. My boss, Greg Miller, hadn't even had the decency to look me in the eye when he handed me my severance paperwork. Company restructuring. Owen, he had mumbled, staring at his expensive mahogany desk. It's nothing personal. But it felt intensely personal when 3 weeks later, I checked my banking app to see a devastating balance of $14.22. My severance was swallowed instantly by back taxes and predatory credit card debt I'd accumulated, trying to keep my head above water. To make matters worse, a neon pink eviction notice was taped to my apartment door, glaring at me like a physical threat. I was entirely out of options. As I sat on my mattress, contemplating which of my electronics I could pawn to buy groceries, my phone vibrated. The caller ID read, "Gable and Associates." "Am I speaking with Mr. Owen Pendleton?" a dry, gravelly voice asked. "Speaking," I replied, my voice raspy from disuse. "This is Aidan Gable. I was the attorney for your late Uncle Harrison Cobb. I'm calling to inform you that his estate has cleared probate. As his only living relative, you are the sole beneficiary of his property at 42 Pelican Way in Astoria, Oregon. Uncle Harry." I hadn't seen the eccentric, reclusive man since I was 10 years old. He was the black sheep of the family, a man who spoke in riddles and trusted absolutely no one. My mother used to say, Harry was paranoid that he spent his days preparing for a disaster that was never coming. I didn't care about his quirks, though. All I heard was property. A house meant an asset. An asset meant money, a lifeline. I packed my beat-up 2006 Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove south through a relentless, punishing coastal rainstorm. Astoria is a beautiful historic logging town, but 42 Pelican Way was a festering scar on the landscape. The house sat at the end of a heavily wooded cul-de-sac. It was a rotting Victorian structure, its slate-grey paint peeling off in long dead strips like sunburned skin. The front yard was a jungle of overgrown blackberry brambles. I unlocked the front door with the heavy brass key Aidan Gable had mailed me, stepping into a house that smelled of wet decay, stale tobacco, and an overwhelming, choking odor of mildew. The floorboards groaned in protest under my weight. I walked through the dust-sheeted living room, looking for anything of value, antiques, jewelry, even a decent television. Nothing. The house was practically gutted, save for rotting furniture from the 1970s. Then I opened the door to the basement. I didn't step down. I couldn't. The water began right at the top step. The entire basement was completely submerged in dark, murky, foul-smelling water. A pipe must have burst months, maybe years ago. Floating on the surface of the oily black water were bloated cardboard boxes, splintered wood, and things I didn't want to look too closely at. It was a stagnant indoor pond. Well, that's a tragedy, isn't it? I jumped, nearly slipping down the wet stairs. Standing in the hallway behind me was an older woman holding a Tupperware container. She had tightly curled white hair, a floral raincoat, and piercing, icy blue eyes. "I'm Bella Gallagher," she said, her tone neighborly, but her gaze intensely calculating. "I live next door, saw a car in the driveway, and figured Harry's kin finally showed up. I brought you a casserole." "Owen," I said, taking the dish awkwardly. "Thank you. Did you know my uncle well?" Nobody knew Harry well, Bella said, her eyes drifting toward the flooded basement doorway. He was a quiet man, kept to himself, always tinkering down in that basement before the water took it. If I were you, Owen, I'd sell the plot for land value and drive back to wherever you came from. Houses like this, they hold on to things. Water damage rots a house from the inside out. Sometimes it's better not to dig into the rot. Her words sent a strange chill down my spine, but I couldn't afford to be spooked. I couldn't sell a house with an indoor swamp. Any inspector would condemn the place on sight. If I wanted to sell, I had to drain it. The next morning, I spent my last bit of credit renting an industrial submersible water pump from a local hardware store. For 3 grueling days, I lived on Bella's cold casserole and instant coffee, managing the heavy, loud machine as it violently sucked thousands of gallons of toxic black water out of the basement and into the overgrown backyard drain. The physical toll was agonizing. My hands were covered in raw, weeping blisters. The smell was nearly unbearable, a toxic mix of algae sewage and dead vermin. But slowly the waterline receded. By the evening of the 3rd day, the pump sucked dry. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight and a pair of rubber wading boots, I descended the slippery wooden stairs into the damp, freezing cavern of the basement. The floor was coated in a thick, slick layer of grey mud. I began using an industrial push broom to sweep the sludge toward the central drain. That's when my broom caught on something metallic. I stopped. I wiped the mud away with my gloved hand. It wasn't a crack in the concrete. It was a perfectly straight geometric seam. I dropped to my knees, scrubbing frantically at the floor. The seam formed a perfect 3-by-3-foot square in the center of the basement floor. In the middle of the square was a heavy, rusted iron pull ring sitting completely flush with the concrete. Uncle Harry hadn't just been tinkering down here. He was hiding something. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the top step of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness, a crowbar and a heavy sledgehammer resting at my feet. At dawn, I went to work. The concrete lid was incredibly heavy and swollen from years of moisture. I wedged the crowbar into the seam, throwing my entire body weight onto the steel lever. The concrete groaned, sending a terrifying echo through the empty house. I slammed the sledgehammer against the edges, shattering the calcified seal that time and water had created. With one final desperate heave, the square slab gave way. It tilted upward, revealing a dark, square cavity, carved directly into the earth beneath the foundation. Inside the cavity sat a massive military-grade iron footlocker. It was wrapped in thick, heavy chains, secured by a brutally large brass padlock. The metal was pitted and scarred by rust, but it was completely intact. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Treasure. It had to be. Why else would a paranoid old man go through the trouble of burying a chained chest under a false concrete floor in a basement? I took the sledgehammer and brought it down on the rusted brass padlock. Clang. Sparks flew in the dim light. I hit it again. And again. On the 5th strike, the internal mechanism shattered and the lock hung loose. I unwound the heavy wet chains. They fell to the mud with a sickening metallic slither. I grabbed the latches of the iron chest and threw the lid back. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of mildew. It was the sharp, sterile scent of ozone-dried paper and gun oil. The chest was completely waterproof. The inside was pristine, bone-dry, and meticulously organized. My breath caught in my lungs. Stacked neatly in the center of the chest were dozens of vacuum-sealed plastic bricks. Through the thick, clear plastic, I saw the faces of Benjamin Franklin. It was cash, mountains of it. My mind raced, trying to calculate the volume. There had to be at least $500,000 here. My hands shook violently as I picked up one of the heavy bricks. My poverty was over. The eviction notice, the credit card debt, Greg Miller's smug face, it was all gone. I let out a hysterical, breathless laugh that bounced off the damp basement walls, but as I looked closer at the brick of cash under the beam of my flashlight, the euphoria drained from my body, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The bills weren't modern. They were older, smaller-headed $100 bills. Series 1990. And wrapped around each stack were thick, faded paper currency straps bearing a distinct stamped logo, the Portland First National Trust. I set the money down with trembling hands and looked at the other items in the chest. To the left of the money lay a heavy, menacing Colt .38 special revolver. Beside it was a small cardboard box of ammunition. I picked up the revolver. The cylinder swung open smoothly. 6 chambers. 4 bullets. 2 had been fired. To the right of the money was a thick, black leather ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Resting on top of the ledger was a Polaroid photograph. I picked up the photo. It was Uncle Harry, looking maybe 30 years younger. He was standing in front of a dark van. But it was the man standing next to him that made my blood run cold. I recognized him instantly from true crime documentaries I'd binged in my tiny Seattle apartment. It was Richard Dickey, Vance No Wait, Richard Dickey Lawson, a notorious regional enforcer who had vanished without a trace in 1994 after the most violent unsolved bank heist in Oregon's history. The Portland Trust heist. 3 guards were killed. Over $2 million was stolen. I opened the black ledger. The handwriting was precise, written in sharp black ink. It wasn't a diary. It was a record of blackmail and payoffs. November 14th, 1994. Disbursement to Deputy T. Briggs. $15,000. Silence secured on vehicle rote. December 2nd, 1994. Payment to Judge H. Fowler. $40,000. Search warrant conveniently lost. January 18th, 1995. Lawson getting greedy. Wants a larger cut of the trust funds. Handled. Handled. I looked down at the Colt .38. 2 bullets missing. Uncle Harry hadn't just been hiding stolen money. He was the architect of the heist, the one who paid off the town officials, and he had murdered his partner to keep the secret. Suddenly, the single bulb hanging from the basement ceiling flickered violently and died, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. I froze. Above me, the floorboards of the living room creaked. Step, step, step. Someone was walking around upstairs. I hadn't locked the front door. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on. I hastily threw the ledger, the gun, and the photo back into the chest, slamming the heavy iron lid shut. I kicked the sludge over the top of it, trying to obscure the metal in the mud. "Owen!" a voice called out, echoing down the wooden stairwell. It was Bella Gallagher. I walked to the bottom of the stairs, shining my light upward. She was standing at the top, but she wasn't holding a casserole dish this time. She was holding a long, heavy steel pipe, the kind used for plumbing mains. The sweet neighborly facade was completely gone. Her face was hard, the wrinkles around her mouth set into a grim, ruthless line. I heard the sledgehammer. "Owen!" Bella said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its folksy charm. Harry always was a paranoid fool. He told me the water would keep it safe until the heat died down, but he didn't account for the pipes bursting and ruining the foundation. I've been waiting 28 years for him to pass, so I could get into this house. She took a slow step down the wooden stairs, tapping the steel pipe against the railing. "Now," Bella said softly, her eyes glinting in the beam of my flashlight. "Are you going to be a smart boy and hand over my cut of the trust money, or am I going to have to do to you exactly what Harry did to Dickie Lawson? The flashlight beam trembled in my grip, casting long, frantic shadows against the weeping concrete walls. Bella Gallagher stood 3 steps from the bottom, the heavy steel pipe resting casually against her floral raincoat. The sweet, grandmotherly mask had melted away, leaving behind the hardened, calculating face of a predator who had spent 3 decades waiting for her prey. You were in on it. I breathed the realization, clicking into place like the final tumbler of a bank vault. You weren't just the neighbor. You were part of the Portland Trust heist. Bella offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. Somebody had to know the vault timer codes, Owen. Somebody had to make sure the overnight guards were drinking coffee spiked with sedatives. Harry was the muscle and the planner. Dickie Lawson was the trigger man. But me, I was the invisible architect. I was the senior branch manager of Portland First National. My mind raced. This 70-year-old woman holding a plumbing pipe was the ghost the FBI had been chasing since 1994. Harry double-crossed you, I said, trying to keep her talking, while my eyes darted around the basement looking for a way out. He took the money and hid it here. Harry was a coward. Bella spat her knuckles, whitening around the steel pipe. When the heat came down from the feds, he panicked. He told me he was burying the money under his foundation until the statute of limitations expired, and that he had sent Dickie packing to Mexico. But the years kept ticking by. Then Harry got sick. He refused to let me in the house. He died before I could force him to dig it up. She gestured toward the muddy square with her chin. I see you did the heavy lifting for me. Step away from the hole, Owen. Bella, I said, my voice shaking. I slowly lowered the flashlight, letting the beam illuminate the mud around the chest. Harry didn't send Dickie Lawson to Mexico. I found a Colt point, .38 inside the box. 2 bullets are missing. For a fraction of a second, Bella froze. Her icy blue eyes widened as she processed the implication. She looked down at the muddy water pooled around my boots. He killed him. He killed Dickie. It was the only opening I was going to get. I didn't run for the stairs. She had the high ground. Instead, I kicked out with my heavy rubber wading boot, sending a massive spray of toxic black sludge directly into her face. Bella shrieked, blinded by the foul water, but her reflexes were terrifyingly fast. She swung the steel pipe blindly in a brutal downward arc. The heavy metal slammed into my left shoulder with the sickening sound of cracking bone. White-hot agony exploded down my arm, forcing a ragged scream from my lungs. I dropped the flashlight, plunging us both into chaotic, sweeping shadows. Ignoring the blinding pain, I threw my entire body weight forward, tackling her around the waist. We both went down hard onto the slick wooden stairs. She clawed at my face, her nails tearing the skin on my cheek. But she was an old woman, and desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. I shoved her back into the freezing mud of the basement floor. Before she could recover her footing, I scrambled backward, plunging my good hand into the open iron chest. My fingers bypassed the stacks of cash and closed around the black leather ledger. I didn't care about the millions. I needed leverage. I needed proof. I shoved the ledger into the waistband of my jeans and bolted up the wooden stairs. I could hear Bella gasping and splashing behind me, cursing my name with a ferocity that made my blood run cold. I slammed the heavy basement door shut, turning the deadbolt and throwing my body against it, just as something incredibly heavy, the sledgehammer, smashed into the wood from the other side. The doorframe splintered, but the lock held. Panting, clutching my shattered shoulder, I stumbled through the dark, rotting living room and burst out the front door into the freezing Oregon rain. I didn't bother packing anything. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my Honda Civic, jammed the key into the ignition, and threw it into reverse, tearing out of the driveway of 42 Pelican Way, leaving deep, muddy ruts in the road. I drove blindly for 10 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The pain in my shoulder was excruciating, and my clothes were soaked in toxic basement sludge, but I was alive. I pulled into the desolate, flickering parking lot of an abandoned coastal gas station. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof of the car. I turned on the dim interior dome light and pulled the black leather ledger from my waistband. The cover was damp, but the pages were intact. I flipped through the meticulous entries, my eyes scanning the cursive handwriting. Harry had documented everything. Vault combinations, timelines, and most importantly the payouts. My eyes landed on the entry I had read in the basement. November 14th, 1994. Disbursement to Deputy T. Briggs. $15,000. Silence secured on vehicle route. I pulled out my cell phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type. I pulled up the official website for the City of Astoria Police Department. The page loaded slowly, revealing the staff directory. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach, colder than the rain outside. Staring back at me from the screen, wearing a crisp uniform and a silver badge, was the current Chief of Police, Aidan Briggs. I couldn't go to the local cops. The man in charge of the town was the man who helped Harry cover up a triple homicide bank heist. If I called 911, Chief Briggs wouldn't arrest Bella. He would arrest me, or worse, he would make sure my car drove off the sheer rocky cliffs of Highway 101, just another tragic accident on the treacherous Oregon coast. I was entirely on my own, trapped in a town run by murderers. I had to get to Portland. The FBI field office was there, nearly 2 hours away. If I could hand the ledger to a federal agent, I would be safe. I threw the car into drive and merged onto Highway 30, the winding, heavily forested road that connected the isolated coastal towns to the city. The storm was worsening, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. The windshield wipers slapped frantically against the glass. I kept checking my rearview mirror, jumping at every pair of headlights that appeared in the gloom. 40 minutes outside of Astoria, deep in the Clatsop State Forest, where cellular service completely died, a pair of headlights surged up behind me, closing the distance at terrifying speed. Suddenly, a blinding array of red and blue lights erupted in my rearview mirror. My breath hitched. A dark police cruiser was tailgating me, its siren letting out a short, aggressive wail. Bella must have called him. She must have had a direct line to Briggs. Panic urged me to press the accelerator to the floor, but my 2006 Civic was no match for a modern police interceptor. And if I ran, he would have legal justification to shoot me. I eased my foot onto the brake, pulling onto the muddy gravel shoulder of the highway. The cruiser parked at a harsh angle behind me, its high beams flooding my car with blinding white light. I shoved the black ledger deep beneath the passenger seat, keeping my hands visible on the steering wheel. The driver's door of the cruiser opened. Through the rain-streaked side mirror, I watched a tall, broad-shouldered man approach. He was wearing a dark rain slicker, and his right hand was resting deliberately on the butt of his holstered service weapon. He tapped his flashlight against my window. I rolled it down. The freezing wind howled into the cabin. "Evening," Chief Aidan Briggs said. His voice was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. Rain dripped from the brim of his campaign hat. "You're moving awfully fast for these conditions, son. Let me see your license." I handed him my Washington ID with a trembling hand. He shined his light on the plastic, then aimed the beam directly into my face. "Owen Pendleton," Briggs read slowly. "Harry Cobb's nephew. An old friend of mine, Mrs. Gallagher, just called dispatch. She said she was checking in on you with a casserole, and you attacked her, knocked her into the basement. That's a lie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the agonizing throbbing in my shoulder. She attacked me with a steel pipe. Briggs smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. Is that right? Well, Owen, assaulting an elderly woman is a serious felony. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. We're going to take a little ride back to the station. I looked out at the pitch-black forest surrounding us. There were no other cars, no witnesses. If I stepped out of this car, I was never going to be seen again. My body would be buried deeper than that iron chest. I gripped the steering wheel, forcing myself to look directly into the eyes of a corrupt cop. I'm not getting out of the car, Tom, I said. Briggs's smile vanished. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. I wasn't asking, son. November 14th, 1994. I said, my voice rising over the sound of the rain. $15,000 to secure the vehicle route out of Portland. Paid by Harrison Cobb to Deputy T. Briggs. Briggs froze. His hand stopped halfway to his gun. The silence in the car was suddenly deafening, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the wipers. I found the chest under the concrete, Tom. I continued, speaking rapidly, laying out my dead man's hand. I found the money from the trust heist, and I found Harry's ledger. But you know what's funny about modern technology? You don't need to carry paper anymore. Briggs stared at me, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered under his skin. Before I left the driveway, I took photos of every single page. I lied, praying my bluff held. I emailed them to my probate attorney, Aidan Gable, in Seattle. If I don't call him by 6 a.m. to tell him I'm safe, he has strict instructions to forward those photos to the FBI field office in Portland and every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest. Briggs leaned closer, his eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. He smelled like spearmint gum and wet wool. You're bluffing, kid. You're a broke nobody from Seattle. You don't have the stomach for this. Try me, I said, leaning closer to the window. Shoot me right now. Let's see how long you get to wear that badge when the feds realize the chief of police is an accessory to 3 counts of felony murder. You've had 30 years of freedom, Tom. Do you want to die in federal prison? We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. The rain pounded against the metal roof. I could see the furious calculations happening behind his eyes. He weighed his options, kill me and risk exposure, or let me go, and hope I vanished. Slowly, deliberately, Briggs took his hand off his weapon. He stepped back from my window. You drive out of my jurisdiction, Pendleton. Briggs growled, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. You never come back to Astoria. You never speak to anyone about this. If I ever see your face again, no lawyer in the world is going to save you. He tossed my ID through the open window. It landed on the passenger seat. Briggs turned on his heel, walked back to his cruiser, and shut off his emergency lights. I didn't wait. I slammed the car into drive and sped off into the night, my entire body shaking with adrenaline. I didn't go to sleep. I didn't stop until the sun came up, casting a pale grey light over the steel bridges of Portland. I pulled directly into the visitor parking lot of the FBI field office. I walked into the lobby drenched in rain mud, and blood clutching the black leather ledger to my chest. When I sat down with Special Agent David Harris, I handed over everything. The ledger, the location of the chest, the confession Bella had made in the basement. The raid happened 3 hours later. Dozens of federal agents swarmed 42 Pelican Way. They found the iron chest just as I described it. They arrested Bella Gallagher as she was frantically trying to book a one-way flight to Costa Rica. And before the sun set, federal marshals walked into the Astoria Police Department and arrested Chief Aidan Briggs in front of his entire precinct. But the biggest shock came a week later. When the FBI excavated the basement floor to remove the iron chest, they found something buried 3 feet directly beneath it, the skeletal remains of Richard Dickey Lawson, wrapped in a plastic tarp, with 2.38 caliber bullets lodged in his ribs. Uncle Harry really had handled him. I didn't get to keep the millions in the chest. Because the money was tied to a federal crime, it was completely seized by the government. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. Portland First National Trust had been insured, and the insurance company had placed a $250,000 bounty on the recovery of the stolen funds back in 1994. Because my evidence led to the recovery of the money and the solving of 3 cold case murders, I was awarded the full bounty tax-free. I used the money to pay off my debts, fix my shoulder, and buy a small, quiet cabin in the mountains of Washington state, far away from the ocean, far away from flooded basements. I never spoke to my old boss at Zenith Freight again. Sometimes, when it rains heavily, I can still smell the metallic tang of ozone and mildew. I'm reminded that some secrets refuse to stay buried, and that true monsters don't hide in the dark. Sometimes they live right next door, waiting for the water to rise. And that is the terrifying reality of what I found beneath the floorboards. If you enjoyed this true crime survival story and want to hear more insane, real-life mysteries, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you found a buried chest in your basement? See you in the next one.